Hey, thanks for checking out my video where I'll be sharing my painting process of this flower girl. I'm going to be speaking a bit about my background as an artist, my thought process and inspiration for this piece, but first I'll just go over the materials that I'm using and just my general approach to the painting so you can follow along while I ramble on about all the other stuff. I'm using gouache and a little bit of watercolour, both are by Winsor and Newton, and Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils for the line work and a bit of shading later on. I then finish it with gold Panpastel, and I think it's a white jelly roll pen for the highlights, but I'll pop everything in the description box below. At the start of this video, you can see that I've already actually transferred my sketch onto hot pressed watercolour paper. And for anyone that's unfamiliar with the term hot pressed, it basically just means that the paper is really smooth texture. Most watercolour papers have a lot of tooth and therefore quite a bumpy texture, which is known as cold pressed paper. I personally just prefer it to be smooth. I started this piece with simplicity in mind. I actually come from a digital art background, but I promised myself this year that I'd really take the time to learn a range of traditional mediums. So I'm actually quite new to gouache, watercolour, even just coloured pencils. So it was quite important for me to design something with that in mind, not to go too crazy with the details, so I could just enjoy it and really learn how the mediums work and hopefully get good results. I decided to start with flat washes. I watered down the gouache just to use it like a watercolour, knowing that I'd be building the layers later on. Mostly it was so that I could work at quite a slow pace. I found in the past when working with watercolour, I find myself really rushing to get everything done before the paint dries. So I thought just doing the flat washes would mean I could take my time and sort of reevaluate what I wanted to do next without worrying about the drying times. You'll often see me wetting the paper before I even add any paint, just in order to achieve that really flat look. I made a point of spending time on making my line art really neat, so I know I wouldn't feel there was as much pressure to make something amazing just based on my painting technique alone, as I still feel I'm quite the beginner. I don't know about you guys, but I really struggle with my confidence as an artist and have in the past felt really discouraged when I try something new, and the end result is, in my opinion, quite ugly. But let's be honest, when you try something new, chances are it's going to be ugly because nobody becomes a master at anything overnight. But rather than allowing that feeling to stop me from creating art, I've just learned how to deal with it. So things like what I did here with planning the painting, I found my reference, I created a mock-up, made a sketch, and then the line art before even picking up a paintbrush. And I found that really makes a difference. It means I can just focus on learning to paint and not worry about it being stuck in that ugly phase for longer than it really has to be. And if you're interested in seeing the reference I used, the mock-up that I created and the line art for this piece, then stick around to the end of the video and I'll pop it up on the screen. I think confidence as an artist is a huge topic and probably something to cover in another video, but it was a key factor for this painting and a huge part of why it looks how it does, so I thought I'd just touch on the subject. You'll keep seeing in the video that I go back to areas that are now dry. I'm wetting them all over again on top of the paint, just with plain water to start a new layer. I'm definitely a fan of painting wet on wet, as you get a much smoother result, even if it's just like a small area that you're wanting to add to. It's definitely worth going a bit bigger to avoid those harsh edges that watercolour is known for. You will have just seen that when I added the blush to the cheeks and the nose area, I actually re-wet I think the entire face, just to allow the paint to really spread and make its own gradient. I think if I hadn't wet such a large area, the chances that that blush would have spread to somewhere that was dry, and then it would have created a really hard line along the edge and just completely ruined it, really. I think the hardest part is knowing when to stop moving the paint around though, because when it's wet you can still shape it. I think you'll have seen me do that on the neck area. I kept going in and reshaping it because I wasn't too happy with how the shadows were lying. But usually the more you mess with it, the more things can go wrong. And adding water to wet watercolour, or in this case thinned gouache, actually moves the paint in the direction that the water flows. So the amount of times that I've had too much water on my brush I've not realised, and gone back in to move the paint just using the brush alone, but then the extra water from the brush has pushed it even further, which may be what you want, but I usually don't. In that case, I guess I usually try to lift all of the paint maybe even dab it with like a rag or a bit of tissue and just start again. Moving on to the inspiration for this piece, I already had a vague idea in my mind. I knew that I wanted to do a portrait. It's my favourite thing to draw, and again I knew I'd have more confidence with that. But I also wanted to practice flowers. I'd never actually been that interested in them before, and I don't know if it's like an age thing, but suddenly I love them. So I just really wanted to practice drawing them some more. I've been gathering references mostly just out of habit, but I noticed this one particular photo of a flower, and at first glance it looked like the shape of a person's head and really nice like flowing hair. And I just love the idea of like a beautiful person or a creature growing from a beautiful flower, and I don't know, it really stuck with me. I kept thinking about it and I thought, all right, I'll see what I can come up with then. I still really love the idea, so I'm actually going to try and make this a series. So if you do have any favourite flowers that you'd like to see me try out with this kind of style, then feel free to leave a suggestion below. One thing I do wish I'd done more with this piece though is put more thought into the symbolism. I love making art that has multiple meanings that you can read into as much as you want and take from it what you like, but I didn't really do that too much for this. I mostly just went with like the form of the flower and the model and how to make the shapes work together, almost kind of like a puzzle, I guess. And to go back to what's happening in the painting right now, you'll see that I've actually swapped over to my pencils, just to add a bit more depth and detail that I can't get with a paintbrush. And this was actually done over a few days, and I'd left it overnight. I came back and I realised it was really lacking contrast, so I wanted to push the darker purples and just to make the line art in general pop. So I'm kind of at this stage now where I like how it looks, but I feel like the details could be pushed a bit more. It could still be refined more, but I also feel like I'm on the edge of overworking it and ruining it, so I'm quite nervously like picking out these tiny little bits here and there to add a bit more shading to, and just to try and really refine the shapes a bit more without going over the top. And you'll also see me using some gouache to try and get those highlights in there, and I made the mistake of, I think it was two mistakes really. The gouache wasn't quite thick enough, it was still a bit watered down, meaning that it wasn't opaque. I also didn't want it to be a brilliant white initially. I wanted it to be quite a light pale pinkish, purplish, and then to later on go in with a proper highlight like a brilliant white. But because it was a bit thin, when it went on wet it looked great, but then as soon as it dried it became more sort of translucent and just wasn't as brilliant as I imagined. So you'll see me going back and forth really fighting with these highlights. I think in hindsight I probably should have just gone straight in with the white and made it work. I don't know, learn by doing, right? So I'm nearing the end, and from the beginning of this piece I always had it in my mind that I wanted to embellish it with a bit of shimmery gold. You'll see at some point in the video I try and mix up some watercolour gold, but I just didn't quite like how it came out, so I decided to go with my Panpastel instead. You can see this actually, I was really impatient, and the paint had pretty much dried, but there was a couple of areas in the highlights that I think were just a little bit damp, and the Panpastel just really did not want to stick to it. So you see me keep going over that. Next time I will definitely wait until it's dry. Just to finish the topic of inspiration, I feel my tastes recently have really influenced my style, as I recently discovered pop surrealism, which is an art movement, or I guess you could call it a style, that I just love. I actually found it through an artist who you may have heard of. She's quite a big YouTuber. Her portraits are just stunning. She goes by the name of Happy D Artist and is definitely worth checking out. So I'll pop the links to her social medias and everything in the description below, but do go check her out, she's great. And that brings us to the end of the video. Thanks if you stuck it out this far. If you liked it, do hit that like and subscribe button, and hopefully I'll see you for the next one. Bye!